Hey guys, tonight we step back in time and find ourselves smack in the middle of ancient Rome, around 117 AD, right when the empire is peaking under Emperor Trajan. You're standing in the heart of the city, but don't get too comfortable. The streets are packed, the air smells like a mixture of roasting meat, garbage, and something suspiciously like fermented fish sauce. The noise is relentless, vendors shouting, chariots clattering, and the occasional braying donkey adding to the chaotic orchestra. You probably won't survive this day without tripping over a toga, getting hit by a cat, or losing your sandals in the mud. But hey, at least you're alive in history's greatest empire, right? So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Oh, and while you're at it, drop your location and local time in the comments. I'm always curious where in the world you're tuning in from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. As you look around, the grandeur of Rome's massive stone buildings and marble columns towers over you. The city is packed with people, merchants hawking wares, slaves carrying heavy loads, senators in their pristine togas, and ordinary citizens hurrying about their business. The streets are narrow and often clogged with mud and waste. Yes, Romans didn't have modern sanitation systems like ours, but they did invent the first public toilets. Still, it's hardly pleasant. You can almost feel the grime settling on your skin, and the sun is relentless overhead. Historians still argue whether the empire's bustling cities were more like thriving centers of culture or just incredibly stressful places to live. You'd think being in Rome means endless luxury and leisure, but the truth is you'd spend most of your day just trying not to get sick or mugged. The sheer scale of the city is overwhelming, about 1 million people jammed into crowded neighborhoods. That's roughly 10 times the size of a modern city like Paris at the time. As you trudge along the cobbled streets, you catch a glimpse of the famous aqueducts towering above, ingenious engineering marvels carrying fresh water to fountains, baths, and wealthy homes. You've got running water, but it's mostly for show if you're poor. Most people drink from communal fountains or risk the dubious safety of wells. You notice street vendors selling garum, the fermented fish sauce that Romans love on everything. Imagine the smell. It's like if ketchup was made out of smelly fish guts and your entire meal was doused in it. Fun fact, Romans were so obsessed with garum they even had recipes for mixing it with honey or wine. No wonder historians still argue whether garum was the ancient world's greatest delicacy or just a fishy nightmare. Despite the overwhelming chaos, there's a strange energy in the air, a mix of ambition, tradition, and raw survival. You can tell this empire is both magnificent and merciless. You try to blend in, but your shoes betray you. They are too clean, too new, and definitely not made for trudging over broken stones and animal droppings. Remember this feeling, the city's pulse, its smells, its sounds. It's going to be the backdrop for everything that follows, because surviving in Rome means adapting to a world where civilization and chaos collide in equal measure. You wake up, or at least try to, in a cramped insula, one of those ancient Roman apartment blocks that look sturdier than they feel. The sun has already started its lazy crawl across the sky, streaming through a tiny window with no glass, just a wooden shutter that rattles in the morning breeze. Your mattress is a thin straw-filled sack on a wooden frame that creaks like it might collapse any second. The sheets. Well, if you can call the scratchy linen you have sheets, they probably haven't been washed in weeks, and the smell says as much. You blink against the light, hearing distant sounds, the rooster crowing, street vendors setting up stalls, the low murmur of neighbors starting their day, then that unmistakable distant splash of water from the public fountain. Your first challenge. The bathroom situation. Forget private toilets, those are luxuries for the elite. You shuffle down the hall to a shared latrine that smells like a swampy mix of human activity and damp stone. There's no privacy here. Everyone uses the same stone bench with holes carved out side by side, so you get a bit more social time than you bargained for. Romans even used a communal sponge on a stick instead of toilet paper, which they rinsed in a bucket of water afterward. Imagine that. Hey, mind if I borrow your sponge? Not exactly a morning confidence booster. After you survive the latrine, it's time for personal hygiene, or as close as Romans got. Toothpaste is basically a weird paste made from crushed bones, oyster shells, and sometimes even powdered mouse brains. Charming, right? The Romans believed these abrasives helped clean teeth, but your teeth feel more like you just scrub them with sandpaper. There's also the infamous use of crocodile dung as sunscreen and deodorant, but historians still argue whether this was a widespread practice or just a fringe folk remedy. Either way, you definitely skip that step. The water for washing is hauled from the fountain or sometimes the public baths later on. If you're lucky enough to get to the baths in the evening, that's a different story: warm pools, steamy rooms, and a chance to gossip with fellow Romans. But for now, you're stuck with a cold splash from a bucket. Clothing is another obstacle first thing in the morning. Your tunic is wool, which itches immediately. You wrestle with the fabric, tugging at it while trying not to wake your neighbors. The wealthy will have linen, which is cooler, but you're not them. And the togas. Let's just say these big woolen drapes aren't exactly practical for everyday wear, especially before coffee existed. Breakfast comes next, or as much as you can stomach. Romans often started with a simple meal called entaculum, basically stale bread dipped in wine or water, sometimes with a bit of cheese or olives. If you're lucky and rich, it may be honey or fruit, but for most, it's a modest affair. The thought of dormice stuffed with nuts and honey, yes, that was a delicacy. It makes you grateful for whatever you have. The Roman diet was surprisingly repetitive: lots of grains, legumes, and that garum fish sauce you smelled yesterday. Morning in Rome isn't about leisurely waking up with coffee and croissants. It's a series of awkward, slightly smelly rituals performed in tight quarters, with no real privacy, and a persistent soundtrack of city life buzzing just outside your window. You might feel like you're trapped in a smoky, scratchy blanket of survival. As you prepare to face the day, you notice the fast street cleaners, mostly slaves, sweeping away garbage and animal waste, though it's a losing battle. The sanitation in Rome was famously uneven. Aqueducts brought clean water in, but sewage often ran openly in the streets. Historians still argue whether Rome's public sanitation was truly advanced or just a clever illusion hiding an underlying mess. But you have to keep moving. The empire doesn't wait for anyone to wake up fully. You're hungry now, and it's time to figure out what the Romans actually ate for breakfast. The city's markets buzz nearby, stalls piled with loaves of bread, heaps of olives, and jars of honey that glint in the morning sun. If you're a typical citizen, your breakfast will be simple: some bread dipped in wine or water, maybe a few olives if you're lucky. It's a far cry from the breakfast buffets we're used to today, but it's filling enough to keep you moving through the day. Now, if you happen to be wealthy, and let's be honest, you're probably not, you'd be nibbling on far more exotic fare. The rich Romans loved to start their day with eggs, cheese, fruits, and sometimes even stuffed dormice. Yes, dormice, the little rodents, were considered a delicacy. They'd fatten them up in special terracotta jars and stuff them with nuts and honey before roasting. Don't worry, no dormice were harmed in your breakfast today, but it's a good reminder that Romans had a very different idea of delicacy. Historians still argue whether dormice were a widespread treat or just an eccentric fad among the elite. For the plebeians, the working class, that olive oil and bread combo was the go-to. Olives weren't just food, they were a staple, almost like the potato in later centuries. You'd probably snack on salted fish or dried fruit if you could find them, but fresh fruit was a luxury. One thing that might surprise you is how important garum was to their meals. That fermented fish sauce you smelled yesterday. It's literally the ketchup of Roman cuisine. Sprinkled on everything from bread to meat, it was the secret flavor bomb. Romans were obsessed with garum to the point where entire industries were built around making and trading it. If you thought your kitchen smelled funky, you should see the garam factories, full of vats of fermenting fish guts in the open air. Yum! If you're feeling brave and want a real taste of Roman breakfast, imagine dipping your bread in a mixture of honey, pepper, and garam. It's the kind of combo that makes you appreciate modern peanut butter and jelly sandwiches a lot more. Outside the market, street vendors call out their goods in booming voices, offering cheap snacks like cheese curds, olives, or flatbread stuffed with herbs. It's the kind of bustling food scene you could get lost in if you weren't busy dodging cats and stray dogs. Breakfast was often quick, eaten standing or on the go because most Romans had busy days ahead. The idea of lounging over pancakes with coffee was definitely not part of the agenda. And if you had children, you'd be sharing your food with them, often little more than scraps. Interestingly, bread was sometimes stamped with the baker's mark. Think of it as the Roman version of a food label. Bakers were proud of their craft, and competition was fierce. There's even evidence that some bakers sold bread made from inferior grain when demand was high, which probably explains why some mornings your bread tastes like cardboard. So, you finish your humble meal, the taste of salty olives lingering on your tongue, the faint tang of garam teasing your senses, and you prepare to face a day in a world that's equal parts fascinating and unforgiving. Remember this moment, simple, messy, and full of unexpected flavors, just like Rome itself. Dressing for a day in Rome is less about fashion and more about figuring out how not to sweat through your clothes before breakfast even hits your stomach. You grab your wool tunic, a fabric that feels like a scratchy blanket wrapped in sandpaper. It's not breathable, it's heavy, and it's already 100 degrees out, but that's your lot. The wealthier folks get to enjoy linen, which is lighter and cooler, but your family in the wool camp today. Next up is the toga, the piece de resistance of Roman attire. It's basically a huge semicircle of wool that you have to wrap around your body just so. Getting it right is part art, part wrestling match. If you pull it too tight, you risk restricting your breathing. Too loose, then you look like you're wearing a giant limp pancake. And yes, the toga is absolutely sweat-inducing, like wearing a woolen curtain on a hot summer's day. Good luck with that. Sandal choice is also critical, but options are limited. You slip on basic leather sandals with straps that are notorious for causing blisters. Flip-flops were nowhere to be found, and closed shoes were for special occasions or soldiers. Expect your feet to be dusty, scraped, and generally unhappy by noon. But clothing in Rome is more than just comfort, it's a language of status. Different colors and styles tell everyone whether you're a senator, a merchant, or a slave. The infamous purple stripe on a senator's toga. That's a big deal. Wearing purple was a reserved right for the elite since the dye came from rare sea snails and cost a fortune. Wearing it without permission could get you in serious trouble. Historians still argue about just how strictly this rule was enforced, but it's safe to say you don't want to be caught impersonating a senator. The poor, meanwhile, might wear a simple tunic with a cloak when it got chilly, practical and cheap. Slaves often went barefoot or wore rags. Fashion wasn't about expressing yourself, it was about survival and signaling your place in the social hierarchy. So, every morning you're not just dressing, you're broadcasting your entire social identity to the world. And don't forget the accessories, those were mostly reserved for the upper classes. Rings, brooches, then sometimes amulets for protection against the evil eye. The Romans believed these little charms could keep bad luck away, which was handy since daily life could be a minefield of risks, from political intrigue to just crossing a crowded street. Sweating in your wool and leather isn't the only discomfort. Imagine the challenge of keeping your clothes clean. With so much dust, mud, and urban grime flying around, your tunic quickly turns from off-white to a lovely shade of "I've been working in a sewer." Laundry was done by hand or by professional laundries called fulonicae, where clothes were soaked in vats of fermented urine, a natural cleaner. Yes, urine, the Romans swore by it, and historians still argue whether the practice was sanitary or just downright gross. So, you finish your wardrobe battle, feeling a bit like a human burrito but ready to face whatever Roman society throws at you. Your clothes might not be comfortable, but at least they mark your place in this sprawling, chaotic empire. Remember that scratchy feeling. You'll want to come back to it later, probably while wishing for a modern t-shirt and sneakers. Your morning unfolds into the reality of work, which, spoiler alert, isn't anywhere close to a 9-to-5 with coffee breaks. You are, if for today, a plebeian laborer, or maybe a scribe if you're lucky, because let's face it, being a senator or patrician is off limits unless you happen to be born into that life. Your job is your class, 10 in Rome. That line is as clear and unyielding as the marble columns of the Forum. If you're a laborer, your day starts early and ends late, often in the hot sun or inside grimy workshops. You might be hauling stone for construction projects, digging trenches for aqueducts, or scrubbing the city's massive water channels. Fun fact is some aqueduct scrubbers had to climb inside narrow stone pipes, dark, cramped, and full of who knows what, to keep the water flowing. It's a job historians still debate about in terms of health risks and social status, but it's safe to say you're not winning any Employee of the Month awards. If you're a scribe, you're lucky enough to spend your days indoors, copying official documents or keeping accounts. Literacy wasn't common among plebeians, so scribes held a slightly elevated place in society. But it's tedious work, ink-stained fingers, cramped writing tables, and constant worry about making mistakes, because the empire doesn't forgive clerical errors lightly. There's no such thing as weekends or holidays for most Romans. The calendar is packed with festivals and religious days, but many were working days in disguise or required some kind of service to the gods. Your work never really stops, and the concept of leisure is mostly reserved for the elite. Payment is usually in kind or coin, and wages are modest. You might get a ration of grain, olive oil, or wine, yes, wine for the workers too, but mostly watered down. Alcohol is practically part of the diet, and some historians argue it helped stave off diseases, but it also made for a lot of messy public behavior. Speaking of messy, the working conditions are harsh. You don't have OSHA or union reps. You're exposed to dust, dirt, and the ever-present risk of injury from heavy tools or falling stones. Slaves might do similar work but without pay and with even fewer rights. Their lives were brutal, and though they formed a significant part of Rome's labor force, they were invisible in the social hierarchy. For some, work is a constant hustle to avoid poverty or starvation. For others, it's a stepping stone to slightly better status, but social mobility is limited. Historians still argue how rigid Roman social classes really were. Some evidence suggests there was more fluidity than we imagine, but you're still more likely to spend your life in the role you were born into. And don't forget the endless paperwork. If you work for the government or the army, you'll be buried in scrolls, orders, and taxes. Tax collectors were feared and hated. They were the reason why so many revolts broke out across the empire. Your daily grind ends with aching muscles and a body that feels more like a machine than a person. But hey, at least you're not scrubbing the aqueduct pipes right now, right? Remember this exhaustion, this constant push against a system designed to keep you working hard but never rising too high. After a long day of grueling work, it's finally time for a break, and in ancient Rome, that usually means heading to the public baths, or thermae. Picture a sprawling complex filled with steam, warm water, and more Romans than you've ever seen crammed into one place. It's a bit like your local swimming pool, but with way more drama and less chlorine. Walking into the baths, you immediately feel the shift from the harsh city streets to an oasis of warm marble and trickling fountains. The air is thick with steam and the mingling scents of oils, sweat, and a hint of perfumed powder. The baths are more than just a place to get clean, they're the social hub of Roman life. Here, everyone, from slaves to senators, mingles, debates politics, gossips, and sometimes even conducts business deals. It's the original networking event, minus the small talk about weather. Your first stop is the apoditerium, the changing room, where you leave your clothes piled in a corner or with the slaves who guard them, always a risk, but that's the deal. Then you make your way through a series of rooms designed to wake up your body and soothe your muscles. The frigidarium is a cold plunge pool that shocks your system, followed by the tepidarium, a comfortably warm room to relax, then finally the caldarium, a steaming hot bath that opens your pores and helps you sweat out the day's grime. After soaking, it's time for the strange but popular practice of scraping off dirt and dead skin with a tool called a strigil, a curved metal scraper that you drag over oiled skin. Think of it as a medieval exfoliation routine, but way less glamorous. There's even a bit of a debate among historians about how effective and common this practice really was, but most agree it was a daily ritual for many Romans. You might also get a massage or dip into a sauna-like room, though these luxuries were often reserved for wealthier bathers. But even the public baths offer a surprising level of comfort compared to your cramped apartment and dusty streets. And here's a quirky tidbit: sometimes, the baths featured libraries, lecture halls, and even snack bars. Yes, Romans could grab a bite or listen to poetry readings while they soaked. If you're lucky, you might even overhear a senator arguing about the latest political scandal or a gladiator bragging about his last fight. The baths also have a more practical side. Cleanliness helped prevent disease, which was a constant threat in crowded cities. However, the water wasn't always changed regularly, so the baths could also be breeding grounds for germs. Historians still argue how sanitary Roman baths really were, but either way, they were vital to urban life. So as you lounge in the warm waters, surrounded by chatter, steam, and the occasional splash, you realize that despite the grime and hardships, the baths offered a small slice of luxury and community in an otherwise tough world. Remember the sensation of that hot water, the cool marble beneath you, and the shared humanity of Romans across social classes, all just trying to wash off the day and maybe, just maybe, relax. Refreshed, you step out of the baths and back into the hustle of the Roman streets, where the day's heat still lingers and the city buzzes with endless energy. Now it's time for the midday meal, known as the cena, which for most Romans was the main and most important meal of the day. But don't picture a lavish feast with servants fanning you and wine flowing endlessly. That's a dinner for the wealthy elite. For you, the plebeian or lower-class Roman, the cena is a modest but hearty affair, and probably eaten standing or sitting on simple benches. Food availability depends a lot on your social status and location. The staples are still bread, legumes like lentils and chickpeas, and plenty of vegetables, cabbage, onions, leeks, and garlic. Romans loved their flavors bold, so you'll find dishes heavily seasoned with herbs like dill and coriander, plus that ever-present garum sauce, which is basically their version of ketchup but fishier and far less sweet. If you can afford it, meat makes an appearance. Not as often as you'd think though. Pork was the most common meat eaten by Romans, especially among the poor. They ate it in the form of sausages, boiled chunks, or stews. Beef was rarer and mostly enjoyed by the rich. Fish and shellfish were also popular in coastal cities but expensive inland. One of the quirky dishes that might catch your eye is called maritum, a kind of rustic cheese spread mixed with garlic, herbs, and sometimes nuts, eaten with bread. Think of it as the Roman equivalent of garlic hummus but with way more punch. Historians still debate how often this was a common dish versus a seasonal or regional specialty, but it's definitely an interesting flavor profile. Street food vendors also make the cena flexible. You could grab a quick snack like a stuffed pastry or grilled sausages, which were favorites among busy city dwellers. And yes, the idea of fast food isn't new. Romans had their own version of takeaway joints called thermopolia, where hot food was sold from counters directly onto the street. It was the ancient equivalent of your local food truck, minus the Spotify playlist. The dining scene is noisy, crowded, and smells like a mix of herbs, smoke, and roasting meat. It's not exactly fine dining, but it's real, it's communal, and it's what keeps you fueled. And if you're lucky, you might get a little dessert, a fig or a piece of honeyed cake made from wheat flour. The concept of the banquet dinner with reclining couches, multiple courses, and endless wine was mostly reserved for the upper classes. So while you're eating your cena sitting on a wooden stool or even on the street steps, the rich are hosting extravagant parties with exotic spices, live entertainment, and exotic dishes like flamingo tongues. Yes, the flamingo tongues, the delicacy that definitely wins the weirdest food prize. Eating in Rome is as much about survival as it is about culture, and your meal choices reveal your place in the vast social web of the empire. The plebeian diet might not be glamorous, but it's hearty and practical, perfect for keeping you moving through a long, tough day. So, as you chew on that tough bread and maybe a chunk of salty cheese, you remind yourself, surviving Rome means eating well enough to keep going, but never enough to get too comfortable. Evening falls and the city transforms under the fading light, but your day isn't quite over. Entertainment in ancient Rome was both a necessity and a distraction from the daily grind, and if you're lucky, or have a few coins to spare, you might catch a show at the theater or the amphitheater. These places are packed with eager spectators, from rowdy kids to toga-wrapped elders, all ready to be amazed, amused, or terrified. Theaters were the go-to for drama and comedy, often performed in large open-air spaces. Plays were a mix of mythology, history, and farce, with actors wearing masks to amplify their voices and expressions. Romans loved slapstick humor and political satire, so you might find yourself laughing at jokes about senators' scandals or the latest gossip. The theater was a kind of social commentary, and some plays poked fun at the very people in power. Historians still argue about how subversive these performances could really get without triggering censorship. If you're in the mood for something more thrilling, the amphitheater is where gladiators fight. The Colosseum might be the most famous, but similar arenas existed across the empire. Gladiators were mostly slaves or prisoners forced to fight, but some volunteered for fame and a shot at freedom. The crowd roared with every clash, and the atmosphere was electric. It was a brutal spectacle but also a major part of Roman culture. Interestingly, gladiator fights weren't always a death sentence. Matches often ended before one was seriously hurt, depending on the editor's mood and the crowd's preferences. For a change of pace, you could visit a public festival or religious celebration. Romans loved their holidays. There were dozens throughout the year, filled with processions, music, and communal feasting. Festivals were chaotic and joyful, offering a brief escape from the usual routine. Sometimes wild and unruly, they reflected the city's layered and vibrant culture. Street performers also roamed the city, jugglers, musicians, and acrobats providing entertainment for those who can't afford tickets. These performers live precarious lives but are vital to the city's rhythm, bringing color and sound to otherwise dusty streets. Drinking was a communal affair as well, often accompanied by singing and storytelling. Taverns, called coponi, were rough and smoky, frequented by sailors, soldiers, and laborers. The wine was usually diluted and not exactly what you'd call vintage. Still, it was an important social lubricant. Interestingly, the Romans invented the concept of the intermission during performances, giving the audience a break to stretch, chat, or grab snacks. This might be the earliest known example of a pause during entertainment, something we now take for granted at theaters and concerts. As you settle in among the crowd, the sounds of applause, laughter, and music wrap around you like a warm blanket, and for a moment, the worries of work and survival melt away. It's a chance to connect, to be part of something bigger, and to glimpse the soul of Rome itself. So, whether you're watching a tragic hero fall or a gladiator raise his sword, remember that this is not just entertainment, it's a lifeline in a city that never truly sleeps. As night deepens, you finally return to your cramped domus or insula, the Roman apartment building that's far from the luxury of a villa. If you live in the city center, your home is probably a tiny room with thin walls, a dirt floor, and little privacy. You might share it with family members, pets, and perhaps an unruly neighbor who snores louder than the city's bustling streets. Insulae were notorious for their fire hazards. Built mostly from wood and poorly constructed, they could catch fire easily, leaving entire blocks in ash. And since there was no modern firefighting service, people mostly relied on bucket brigades and prayer. Historians still debate how widespread these fires were, but it's safe to say that living in an insula was a gamble with flame. Running water was a luxury, and most Romans collected water from public fountains or wells. You might have to haul heavy jars up several flights of stairs, and no elevators here, to get your daily supply. Bathing late in the evening wasn't common for the plebeians, so you probably rely on a quick wash with a cloth and a bowl. The lighting situation is dim at best. Oil lamps made from clay or bronze provide flickering flames that barely illuminate your space, casting long shadows on the rough walls. Candle use was rare and expensive, so the night is mostly a time to rest rather than be productive. Meals at this hour are light, maybe some leftover bread dipped in olive oil or a few olives saved from the day's dinner. You might sip watered wine to relax, but overindulgence could lead to trouble with the neighbors or worse. The sounds outside your window include distant chatter, the occasional dog barking, and the faint clang of metal from late-night smiths or street vendors packing up. Rome never truly sleeps, and neither do you, not with the constant hum of city life buzzing just beyond your walls. Before you settle in, you might reflect on the day's events, who you met at the baths, the gossip overheard at the forum, or the brutal but thrilling gladiator fight. Life in Rome is a series of highs and lows, moments of camaraderie and harsh reality, all woven into the fabric of a city that's as alive as it is unforgiving. Historians still argue about the quality of life in Roman insulae. Some say it was worse than any modern slum, others suggest it was vibrant and full of community despite the hardships. Either way, it's not the kind of place where you'd want to linger too long in the dark. As you lay down on your hard pallet, you're reminded that tomorrow will bring more challenges, more dust, and more noise. But for now, the city's sounds become a lullaby, and your mind drifts slowly toward sleep. Remember the flickering lamp light and the distant city noises. They're the soundtrack of Roman nights, as ancient and relentless as the empire itself. Before sleep fully claims you, your mind wanders to the mighty Roman Forum, the beating heart of public life. Imagine stepping out early in the morning, the air crisp and tinged with the scent of fresh bread from nearby bakeries, mingling with the distant noise of merchants setting up stalls. The Forum is a bustling mosaic of vendors, politicians, philosophers, and everyday Romans, all jostling for space and influence. The Forum isn't just a marketplace, it's where justice is served, laws debated, and rumors spread faster than wildfire. You hear the loud oratory of senators arguing over policy, their voices echoing against the marble temples and basilicas. This is where power meets spectacle, and everyone wants a piece of the action. The importance of the Forum can't be overstated. It's where citizens cast votes, attend trials, and worship at temples dedicated to gods like Jupiter and Vesta. One quirky fact, the Vestal Virgins, priestesses of Vesta, held an unusual social power because they maintained the sacred fire of Rome and were granted privileges no other women enjoyed. Historians still argue how much real influence they had, but their presence is a reminder of religion's tight weave into daily life. Markets nearby overflow with goods, spices from the east, wines from Gaul, and exotic items like Egyptian papyrus. Haggling is a noisy affair, full of shouting and gesturing, and if you're clever, you might score a deal on fresh fish or some dried figs. Yet, the Forum's grandeur belies its darker side. Political violence, bribery, and public punishments occur in its shadow. Assassinations and riots were not uncommon, a grim reminder that Rome's democracy was messy, dangerous, and far from perfect. The famous assassination of Julius Caesar right there in the Senate is proof that power struggles often turn bloody. Walking through this complex, you feel both awe and caution. The Forum is the city's pulse, vibrant, chaotic, and absolutely central to Roman identity. So as you close your eyes tonight, remember the Forum's roar, the clash of ideas, and the weight of history pressing down on every stone. The sun rises again, and with it comes the organized chaos of the Roman military camp. If you are a soldier, your life is a strict routine of drills, construction and discipline, but also camaraderie and adventure, if you can call endless marching and guarding adventure. Your camp is a meticulously planned grid of tents, walls, and training grounds, usually surrounded by a ditch and wooden palisade. Roman engineers were masters at building these temporary cities quickly, turning a wilderness spot into a fortified base in days. This efficiency was a key reason for Rome's military dominance, though historians still debate how much of the camp's design was standardized versus adapted to local conditions. Your daily life involves training with weapons like the gladius, a short sword perfect for close combat, and the pilum, a heavy javelin designed to break enemy shields. Physical fitness is non-negotiable. You run, march, then practice formations like the famous testudo, or tortoise shield wall. Meals in the camp are simple: hardtack bread, salted pork, and dried legumes, washed down with posca, a sour wine diluted with water. This might sound grim, but soldiers took pride in their diet. It was practical, filling, and kept morale up. Sometimes you'd get fresh meat or fruit, but it's a rare treat. Your tent mate might be a seasoned veteran or a raw recruit, and the mix of personalities creates a tight-knit community. Letters from home and tales of battles past fill your evenings, often around a small fire. Discipline is harsh, insubordination can lead to flogging or worse. Yet, loyalty among soldiers is fierce. Gladiator fights inspired many recruits, but the life of a soldier is far more dangerous, filled with risks from battle, disease, and harsh weather. Interestingly, some historians argue whether Roman soldiers were truly professional or just glorified conscripts. The truth likely lies somewhere in between, with varying levels of commitment and training over time. Your identity as a soldier is deeply tied to Rome's glory and expansion, but it also means living under strict rules, far from home, always ready to fight or die for the empire. So as you tighten your sandals and prepare for the day's march, remember the rigid discipline, the brotherhood, and the weight of Rome's ambitions on your shoulders. Your days off from the military march are rare but cherished, and you might find yourself wandering the nearby provincial town, which is a fascinating mix of Roman and local cultures. Here, you're no longer in the heart of Rome but on the edges of the empire, where Roman order meets native traditions, creating a patchwork of languages, foods, and customs. Provincial towns often had forums, baths, and temples modeled after Rome's, but with local twists. For example, in Gaul, you might find a temple dedicated to a Roman god like Mars standing next to a shrine for a Celtic deity. This blending of beliefs shows how Rome ruled not just through force but cultural accommodation, a strategy historians still debate about in terms of its effectiveness. Markets in these towns are lively, filled with local produce, Roman imports, and craftspeople selling pottery, textiles, and tools. You might hear traders speaking Latin mixed with local dialects, and the aroma of unfamiliar spices and foods fills the air. If you're adventurous, you could sample a local delicacy, maybe a spiced goat cheese or a honeyed bread flavored with pine nuts. The social scene here is more relaxed but no less complex. Romans often mingled with locals in taverns, sharing wine and stories. But there's also tension. Local elites sometimes resented Roman officials, and rebellions were not unheard of. How deeply the locals truly embraced Roman culture versus resisting it is a question historians still explore. Entertainment here can be simpler than in Rome, often involving music, dancing, and storytelling around fires. You might witness a local festival celebrating harvest or honoring a god unique to the region. These events are colorful, loud, and a chance for community bonding. The provincial lifestyle has its perks: fresh air, natural beauty, and a slower pace, but it also means fewer luxuries and more distance from the empire's heart. Still, for many, it's home. As you walk through cobblestone streets lined with a mixture of Roman columns and thatched huts, you sense the empire's reach and its limits, the push and pull between unity and diversity. So tonight, as you drift off, hold on to the image of these borderlands, where Rome's order and the wildness of the world outside meet in a delicate balance. Back in the heart of the empire, it's time to talk about money, or rather, the lack of it. If you're a typical Roman citizen, your financial situation is often precarious. Rome's economy was complex, but for many a daily life meant hustling to make ends meet, juggling debts, and navigating a system that wasn't designed to be kind to the little guy. Imagine carrying a small pouch of coins, bronze, silver, or, if you're lucky, gold, and knowing it has to cover food, rent, and maybe a bit of entertainment. Most Romans relied on the denarius, a silver coin that was the backbone of currency for centuries. However, inflation and debasement often devalued money, making it harder to get by. Historians still argue about the causes and extent of Rome's economic ups and downs, but it's clear money was a constant source of anxiety. Banks, or agenteriae, existed, but they mostly served the wealthy and merchants. For you, borrowing money might mean dealing with loan sharks or family, both risky options. Debt bondage was a real threat. If you failed to repay, you could become a slave to your creditor. Taxes were heavy and complex. Rome's government relied on provincial taxes and land rents, but city dwellers had to pay their share too, often in the form of indirect taxes on goods. The tax collectors were widely despised and sometimes downright corrupt. On the bright side, the government did provide grain subsidies for the urban poor, especially in Rome, to prevent unrest. The famous bread and circuses policy aimed to keep citizens fed and entertained, preventing revolt. But the quality of grain rations was low, and distribution was often inefficient. Your job might be anything from a craftsman to a shopkeeper, soldier, or laborer, but wages were modest, and job security almost non-existent. Seasonal work, family support, and community ties were crucial buffers against poverty. And here's a quirky fact: Romans used a form of tally sticks or wax tablets to keep financial records, ancient bookkeeping that's surprisingly sophisticated. You can almost hear the scratching of styluses on wax as merchants settle their accounts. So as you count your coins tonight, feeling their weight, remember that money in Rome is both a lifeline and a chain, tying you to the daily struggle of survival. The city's streets grow quieter as night deepens, but your thoughts turn to the mysterious side of Roman life, the beliefs, superstitions, and strange rituals that lurk beneath the grandeur of the empire. Religion in Rome isn't just about temples and gods, it's a daily presence, woven into every action, decision, and even the smallest moment. Romans believed the world was full of spirits, Laras and Panetes, guardians of the home and family, requiring constant attention and offerings. You might sprinkle a bit of wine or food on the household hearth each morning, whispering a quick prayer. Missing these small rituals was seen as tempting fate, inviting misfortune. Divination was a serious business. Haruspices examined the entrails of sacrificed animals for omens, augurs read the flight patterns of birds. If you were about to make a big decision, say, a business deal or a military campaign, you'd want the gods' approval first. Historians still debate how much these practices influenced politics, but they were undeniably woven into the empire's fabric. A quirky, lesser-known fact: Romans believed that ghosts, manes, could linger and haunt the living, especially if their burial rites were neglected. Fear of restless spirits led to elaborate funerary customs, designed to ensure peace for the dead and safety for the living. The idea that a bad dream or sudden chill might be a ghost's warning wasn't unusual. Superstition extended to everyday life. For example, the number 4 was considered unlucky, and spilling salt was a bad omen, something you might brush off, but it could also lead to sudden panic during a meal. Roman soldiers carried phallic amulets, thought to ward off evil, talk about lucky charms with a twist. Public festivals often had a ritualistic edge, with sacrifices and processions meant to maintain divine favor. Some rituals were joyful and communal, others eerie and solemn. The Saturnalia festival, for example, temporarily inverted social roles. Slaves became masters for a day, a wild time that must have felt like organized chaos. Religion and superstition offered comfort and control in a world often unpredictable and harsh. They were a way to explain the inexplicable, a source of hope, and sometimes a political tool. So, as you lie in bed tonight, remember the flicker of candles on altars, the whispered prayers, and the cautious glances at the shadows. Rome's mysteries never truly sleep. The dawn of your last day in the Roman Empire is tinged with a quiet reflection. Life here, with all its chaos, color, and complexity, is not for the faint-hearted. You've seen the relentless pace of the city, the brutal necessities of survival, the vibrant culture, and the precarious balance between order and disorder. You're reminded that Rome is a city of extremes, the heights of architectural genius and the depths of social inequality, grand celebrations and harsh punishments, unwavering tradition and constant change. The empire's strength lies in this tension, a sprawling organism that breathes through its people's sweat, hopes, and fears. Walking through the forum one last time, you noticed the weathered faces of statues gazing down on you, silent witnesses to centuries of history. You recall the gladiator fights, the crowded baths, the military camps on distant frontiers, and the provincial towns where Rome's influence is a delicate dance of power and culture. Historians still argue whether life for most Romans was more hopeful or hopeless, but what's clear is that their world demanded resilience and adaptability. You might not have lasted a day in their sandals, but through these stories, you glimpse the pulse of an empire that shaped the world we know. As you prepare to leave this ancient city behind, the sounds of Roman life, the chatter, the clatter of carts, the distant calls of merchants fade gently into the past. The dust settles, the lamps dim, and the empire's heartbeat slows, inviting you to rest. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. As you close your eyes and drift away, imagine the warm Roman sun sleeping below the horizon, casting long shadows over marble columns and crowded streets. The city's noise fades into a gentle murmur, like waves lapping softly against a shore. Feel the calm settling around you, the steady breath of an empire that, though ancient and distant, still pulses faintly beneath the surface of time. Rest now in the quiet spaces between history's loudest moments, where everyday lives unfolded with all their hopes and fears, laughter and sorrow. The dust of centuries drifts down like a soft blanket, covering the ruins and memories alike. Know that you carry a part of this world with you, a reminder of human endurance, complexity, and connection. Sleep well, wrapped in the comfort of stories told and secrets kept. Tomorrow is a new day, but tonight, you are part of something timeless. Sweet dreams.